February 25th, 1944, 30,000 feet above Bavaria, Germany. The morning sun glinted off the aluminum skin of 60 B-17 flying fortresses as they approached their target, the Messerschmitt aircraft factory in Augsburg. Major Hans Dorfmann of Jagdgeschwader 7 smiled coldly as he eased his Messerschmitt Me-262 into position, the twin jet engines humming with a sound unlike any propeller aircraft. He was certain that today would mark the beginning of the Luftwaffe's resurgence and the end of American air supremacy over German skies. He could not have known that in less than 30 minutes his understanding of the air war would be shattered forever. Before we dive into this story, drop a quick hi in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. This is the story of how a technological marvel collided with the harsh reality of industrial warfare, and how the pilots who flew these revolutionary machines discovered that innovation alone could not overcome the overwhelming productive might of the Allied war machine. The morning briefing at Lechfeld Air Base had been charged with unusual energy. Hauptmann Werner Schröder, a veteran of the Eastern Front with 28 kills to his credit, stood before the assembled pilots of JG-7, Germany's first jet fighter wing. At 32, Schröder's once youthful face had hardened into a mask of determination, his eyes constantly scanning, calculating as if still tracking Soviet fighters over Stalingrad. "Gentlemen," he announced, tapping a pointer against the large wall map. "Intelligence reports a major American bombing formation approaching from the west. Estimated 60 to 70 B-17s with fighter escort, targeting the Messerschmitt works. This is the moment we've been waiting for." The pilots exchanged glances of barely contained excitement. Among them was Oberleutnant Hans Dorfmann, 24 years old, with a scholar's wire-rimmed glasses that seemed at odds with his pilot's leather jacket. Next to him sat Lieutenant Karl Müller, barely 19, with the eager look of a hunting dog straining at the leash. "For months, we've been promised that the Me-262 would change the course of this war," Schröder continued. "Today, we put that promise to the test. Our jets are faster than anything the Americans have by almost 200 kilometers per hour. Their P-47s and P-51s will be obsolete the moment we appear." Technical Sergeant Walter Bishop of the 361st Fighter Group had been flying P-51 Mustangs for 6 months. At the pre-dawn briefing at Bottisham Airfield in England, he and his squadron mates learned they would be providing long-range escort for today's bombing mission deep into southern Germany. Colonel Thomas Jenkins, the group commander, was blunt in his assessment. "Intelligence believes the Germans may be deploying their new jet fighters today," Jenkins said, his weathered face serious beneath his salt and pepper hair. "The Me-262 can reach speeds of over 540 miles per hour. That's more than 100 miles faster than your Mustangs." A murmur rippled through the gathered pilots. Beside Bishop sat Lieutenant Jack Henderson, a former college football player whose broad shoulders seemed to strain against his flight jacket. "So what you're saying, sir, is that we can't catch them," Henderson said. Jenkins nodded. "Not in a straight chase, no. But the 262 has weaknesses. Its engines accelerate slowly, it's less maneuverable at low speeds, and most importantly, gentlemen, there are very few of them. We have numbers." Bishop glanced around the briefing room. 40 pilots for this mission alone, and this was just one fighter group of many that would be escorting the bombers. "We've been ordered to deploy in maximum strength," Jenkins continued. "The bombers must reach their target. If the Germans want to test their new toys today, they'll have to deal with the full might of the 8th Air Force." Back at Lechfeld, Technical Officer Dieter Weber was overseeing the final preparations of the Me-262s. A civilian engineer seconded from Messerschmitt, Weber had spent 3 years helping develop the revolutionary aircraft. He watched as ground crews tended to the complex machines with a mixture of reverence and anxiety. "How many are flight ready?" asked Major Heinrich Brandt, the wing's commanding officer. Weber consulted his clipboard. 8, Herr Major. The 9th had a turbine blade issue during warm-up. Brandt's face tightened. 8 against how many American aircraft? Intelligence estimates 60 bombers, perhaps 40 escorts. 8 against 100, Brandt said quietly. Each of our pilots will need to shoot down a dozen Americans to make a difference. Weber adjusted his glasses nervously. The Me-262 is equipped with 4 30mm Mk-108 cannons, Herr Major. A 2-second burst can bring down a B-17. In terms of firepower and speed, 262 is worth 10 conventional fighters. Brandt gave him a look that made Weber step back slightly. In theory, Herr Weber, in your clean factories and design rooms, we shall see what happens when your theories meet American bullets. As dawn broke, the 8 Me-262s taxied to the runway. In the cockpit of his jet, designated Yellow 4, Hans Dorfmann completed his pre-flight checks with methodical precision. The Jumo 04 turbojets were temperamental beasts, prone to flameouts if mishandled. Through his canopy, he could see Karl Müller in Yellow 7, giving a confident thumbs up. One by one, the revolutionary aircraft roared down the runway, their distinctive howl echoing across the airfield as they took to the sky. Dorfmann felt the familiar surge of acceleration press him back into his seat, followed by the strange sensation of continuing to accelerate even after leaving the ground. The Me-262 climbed at an impressive rate, quickly reaching 20,000 feet where the formation assembled. Yellow Squadron, form up and maintain radio discipline, Schroeder's voice crackled through the radio. Remember your training. Make high-speed passes. Do not engage in turning fights. 500 miles to the west, the bomber stream had been airborne for hours. Captain Robert Harding of the 91st Bomb Group sat at the controls of his B-17, nicknamed Memphis Belle II, in honor of the famous bomber that had completed its tour the previous year. Around him, the sky was filled with flying fortresses, their formation tight and disciplined despite the early morning turbulence. Bandits reported ahead, his radio operator called out. P-51s engaging. Harding nodded grimly. They were still 200 miles from the target. It would be a long day of running the gauntlet. In his Mustang, Walter Bishop scanned the sky constantly, flying in a weaving pattern above and ahead of the bomber formation. The P-51D was a pilot's dream, responsive, fast, and with the range to follow the bombers all the way to the target and back. The addition of the Rolls-Royce Merlin engine had transformed what had been an average fighter into perhaps the finest escort aircraft of the war. "Bogies, 2 o'clock high," came a call over the radio. "Moving fast." Bishop looked up just in time to see contrails streaking across the sky at an impossible speed. "I've never seen anything move like that," Henderson's voice said over the radio, a note of awe in his normally confident tone. "Those are the jets," Colonel Jenkins responded. "Maintain formation and discipline. Remember, they'll have to slow down to attack the bombers." In his Me-262, Dorfmann spotted the bomber formation first, a great armada of flying fortresses stretching across the sky. The American 4-engine bombers maintained a tight defensive formation, their gunners alert and ready. "There they are!" Schroeder's voice came over the radio. "Yellow Squadron, attack pattern Alpha. Yellow 3 and 4, target the lead bombers." Dorfmann acknowledged and pushed his throttle forward. The Me-262 responded instantly, accelerating to over 500 miles per hour. The sensation was intoxicating. No propeller fighter could match this performance. As he closed rapidly on the bomber formation, he could see tiny specks detaching from the massive aircraft, Mustangs moving to intercept. But they seemed to be moving in slow motion compared to his jet. "They can't catch us," Muller's excited voice broke radio discipline. "Their Mustangs are sitting still." "Maintain radio discipline," Schroeder snapped, but Dorfman could hear the satisfaction in his squadron leader's voice. As he lined up his attack run on the lead B-17, Dorfman felt a surge of confidence. The American bomber grew rapidly in his gun sight, its defensive machine guns already firing, but the tracers falling well behind his speeding jet. He pressed the firing button, and the 4 30mm cannons roared to life, sending explosive shells toward the bomber. Several rounds struck the B-17's outer left engine, which immediately began trailing smoke. Dorfman pulled up sharply, the G-forces pressing him into his seat as he climbed away. Below, he could see P-51s scrambling to intercept, but they were simply too slow. By the time they reached his previous position, he was already 3 miles away and setting up for another attack run. "Yellow 4, good hit," Schroeder called. "All aircraft, continue attack runs." In his Mustang, Walter Bishop watched with growing frustration as the German jets made pass after pass at the bomber formation. 3 B-17s were already trailing smoke, and the P-51s seemed powerless to interfere. The Me-262s would zoom in at incredible speed, fire their cannons, and then accelerate away before the Mustangs could close to firing range. "This isn't working," Henderson growled over the radio. "They're picking us apart." Colonel Jenkins's voice remained steady. "Maintain position. Group 2, climb to 35,000 feet and look for them setting up their attack runs. Group 3, drop down to 22,000 and watch for them pulling away. We'll catch them when they slow down to turn." Bishop pulled his Mustang into a climbing turn, pushing up to 35,000 feet where the air was thin and bitterly cold. From this vantage point, he could see the entire bomber stream stretching for miles and the tiny flashes of combat as the jets continued their attacks. Then he spotted it, an Me-262, pulling up after an attack run, bleeding speed as it climbed in a wide arc to set up another approach. "Jet at my 2 o'clock, turning," Bishop called, pushing his throttle to full military power and diving toward the German fighter. The Mustang accelerated rapidly in the dive, closing the distance to the jet. The Me-262 pilot, Dorfman, was focused on the bombers below and didn't see the approaching threat until it was nearly too late. When he finally spotted the P-51, he jammed his throttles forward, but the Jumo engines responded sluggishly, taking precious seconds to spool up to full power. Bishop had only a brief firing window, but he made it count. His 650 caliber machine guns hammered out a deadly rhythm, tracers reaching out toward the German jet. Several rounds struck the Me-262's right engine, causing visible damage. Black smoke began trailing from the wounded turbine. "I'm hit," Dorfman called, wrestling with his controls as the damaged engine began to vibrate dangerously. "Yellow 4 taking damage." "Return to base immediately," Schroeder ordered. "Yellow 7, cover him." Muller acknowledged and pulled his jet alongside Dorfman's damaged aircraft. "I'll keep the Mustangs off you," he assured his comrade. The engagement had suddenly shifted. With one engine damaged, Dorfman's Me-262 was now limited to about 350 miles per hour, still fast, but no longer untouchable. Bishop called in his squadron mates, and soon 4 P-51s were closing in on the wounded jet. "Your bombers are sitting ducks," Muller taunted over an open radio channel, firing a burst that forced Bishop to break off his attack run. "Our jets will sweep your obsolete machines from the sky." But even as he spoke, the tactical situation was transforming. Word of the jet intercept had spread across the American fighter groups, and P-51s were converging from escort positions many miles away. What had been a dozen Mustangs in the immediate vicinity quickly swelled to 30, then 50, and continued to grow. From his damaged aircraft, Dorfman watched in disbelief as the sky seemed to fill with P-51s. They came from all directions, above, below, from the flanks, a swarm of the sleek American fighters converging on the handful of German jets. "Muller, break off and return to base," he called urgently. "There are too many of them." "I won't leave you," Muller replied. his voice tight with tension as he maneuvered to keep the American fighters at bay. In his command Mustang, Colonel Jenkins directed the developing air battle with the precision of a conductor leading an orchestra. Groups 4 and 5 cut off their retreat to the east. Group 3 maintain bomber escort. Everyone else converge on the jets. Don't let them dictate the engagement. The numerical disparity was becoming overwhelming. What had begun as 8 Me-262s against a dozen or so Mustangs in the immediate area had transformed into 7 operational German jets facing nearly 100 P-51s as additional fighter groups responded to the threat. Schroeder recognized the deteriorating situation immediately. All units, disengage and return to base. We are outnumbered. But disengaging proved more difficult than anticipated. The American fighters, while individually slower, used their numbers to block potential escape routes. 3 P-51s would position themselves to force a jet to turn, whereupon another Mustang would take advantage of the 262's reduced speed in the turn to close to firing range. Lieutenant Miller found himself caught in exactly such a trap. Turning to avoid one group of Mustangs, he slowed enough for Walter Bishop to close to effective range. Bishop's 6 machine guns spoke again, rounds tearing into the left wing and cockpit of Muller's jet. The Me-262 shuddered, then rolled inverted and began a steep dive toward the ground. "Muller is hit!" Dorfman called, watching helplessly as his comrade's aircraft plummeted earthward, trailing smoke and flames. There was no ejection, no parachute. The promising young pilot was still with his revolutionary aircraft when it slammed into a Bavarian forest below. The remaining jets were now fighting for survival, using their speed to escape when possible, but forced to maneuver defensively when boxed in by the swarms of Mustangs. Their initial advantage had evaporated in the face of overwhelming numbers. Major Brandt's voice cut through the chaos. All aircraft, Emergency Protocol Delta, abandon the bomber intercept. Return to base individually, maximum speed, minimum altitude. The German formation dissolved as each pilot sought his own escape route. Dorfman, his damaged engine now belching black smoke, had few options. His speed advantage was gone, and the American fighters were closing in. A burst of .50 caliber fire from Henderson's P-51 further damaged his right wing, sending the Me-262 into a dangerous spiral. Fighting with the controls, Dorfman managed to level off at 15,000 feet. His jet was badly wounded, barely responding to control inputs, with one engine dead and the airframe shuddering from structural damage. The nearest friendly airfield was 30 miles away, a distance that would have taken minutes in a healthy Me-262, but might as well have been on the moon in his current condition. Yellow 4 to base. Aircraft severely damaged. Cannot maintain altitude. Preparing to bail out. As he reached for the canopy release, Dorfman looked up to see a P-51 flying alongside his crippled jet, close enough that he could see the American pilot clearly. It was Bishop, whose expression showed not triumph, but professional respect. The American waggled his wings slightly, then pulled away, allowing Dorfman to bail out without strafing him, a courtesy not always extended in the brutal air war. Dorfman took one last look at the revolutionary aircraft he had flown with such pride, then released the canopy and was immediately caught by the slipstream, torn from the cockpit and thrown into the freezing air. His parachute deployed automatically, and he began the gentle descent to German soil below. As he floated downward, Dorfman had a perfect view of the continuing air battle. The remaining Me-262s were fleeing in different directions, pursued by multiple Mustangs. The bomber formation continued relentlessly toward its target, the temporary disruption caused by the jets already being absorbed by the massive American air armada. What had begun as a triumphant demonstration of German technological superiority had devolved into a desperate retreat in the face of American numerical advantage. The harsh mathematics of industrial warfare had asserted themselves once again. 3 days later, Dorfman sat in a debriefing room at Luftwaffe headquarters in Berlin. His right arm was in a sling from injuries sustained during his parachute landing, and fatigue lined his young face. Across the table sat General Lieutenant Adolf Galland, the inspector of fighters, along with several staff officers and a representative from the Messerschmitt Company. "Walk us through the engagement again, Herr Oberleutnant," Galland requested, his expression grave. Dorfman recounted the events of the mission, the initial success of the high-speed attacks, the damage inflicted on several bombers, and then the overwhelming American response. "We simply ran into a numerical buzzsaw," he concluded. "Our 8 jets might have been a match for 30 or 40 Mustangs, but not 100. Galland exchanged glances with his staff officers. "The mission report indicates that only 3 bombers were shot down, at a cost of 5 Me-262s lost and 2 damaged beyond immediate repair. That is not the ratio we need to change the course of the air war." The Messerschmitt representative, Dr. Heinkel, leaned forward. "The aircraft performed as designed, Herr General. It outpaced the American fighters by a significant margin. With greater production numbers, Galland interrupted with a bitter laugh. "Do you know how many fighter aircraft the Americans produced last year? Over 23,000. We struggled to produce 15,000, and most of those were obsolete Bf-109s, not jets." He turned to Dorfman. "Tell me, how many Mustangs did you count during the engagement?" Dorfman hesitated. "It was difficult to make an accurate count, Herr General. They seemed to be everywhere. Based on radio chatter and what I observed, I would estimate at least 100, perhaps as many as 150. 150 fighters to escort 60 bombers, Galland said quietly. That's the reality we face. For every Me-262 we manage to get into the air, they can put 20 Mustangs up to counter it. In England, Walter Bishop was enjoying a rare evening pass to the local pub in the village near Bottisham. Around him, pilots from the 361st recounted their experiences from the recent mission. Henderson was at the center of attention, describing how he'd scored a confirmed kill on one of the German jets. "Fastest damn thing I've ever seen," he said, gesturing with his pint glass. "But once we figured out to catch them during their turns, they weren't so scary." Colonel Jenkins, sitting in the corner with his executive officer, motioned for Bishop to join them. "What did you make of our jet-powered friends, Sergeant?" he asked when Bishop sat down. Bishop considered the question carefully. "They're impressive machines, sir. Faster than anything I've ever encountered. If they'd had 50 of them instead of 8, it might have been a very different day." Jenkins nodded. "Intelligence says the Germans have been struggling with production issues. Apparently, those fancy turbine blades require exotic metals they're running short on, and the engines need replacement after about 10 hours of flight time." 10 hours. Bishop was shocked. "A Merlin engine will run for hundreds of hours between overhauls." "That's the difference between our approach and theirs," Jenkins said, sipping his whiskey. "They're building a handful of wonder weapons. We're building thousands of reliable ones." He set his glass down. "Berlin authorized full production of the Me-262 too late. If they'd done it 2 years ago, we might be having a very different conversation. But now, it's just another case of too little, too late." Back in Germany, Dorfman was reassigned to a Me-262 training unit to help prepare new pilots for the realities of jet combat. On a clear April morning in 1945, he stood watching as a formation of over 1,000 American bombers passed overhead, bound for targets deep in the Reich. Their fighter escort was so numerous that the sky seemed filled with tiny silver crosses as far as the eye could see. Beside him stood a new student pilot, Feldwebel Werner Schmidt, recently transferred from a Bf-109 unit. "Why aren't we scrambling to intercept?" Schmidt asked, bewildered. Surely our jets could inflict significant damage on such a large formation. Dorfman gave him a weary look. We have 3 operational aircraft today, 3 against perhaps 2,000 American planes. What would you have us do? Schmidt's face fell as he processed the information. But I was told the Me-262 would change everything, that each jet was worth 10 of their fighters. It is, Dorfman replied, watching the contrails slowly disperse in the high-altitude winds. But they have 20 fighters for each of our jets. The mathematics are inescapable. He recalled that fateful mission in February, when he had felt such confidence in German technological superiority. How quickly that confidence had evaporated when confronted with the overwhelming industrial might of the American war machine. The Me-262 is a magnificent aircraft, he told the younger pilot, but this war will not be won by having better aircraft. It will be won by having more aircraft, and that is a contest we lost long ago. 2 weeks after Germany's surrender in May 1945, Captain Robert Harding found himself on a special mission. As one of the more experienced B-17 pilots, he had been selected to fly a group of American engineers and intelligence officers to examine captured German aircraft at an airfield near Munich. Among the intelligence officers was Technical Sergeant Walter Bishop, whose encounter with the Me-262s had earned him a temporary reassignment to assist with evaluating the captured jets. As they walked among the dozen or so intact Me-262s lined up on the apron, Bishop was struck by how sleek and modern they looked compared to propeller-driven aircraft. An American engineer was explaining the technical specifications to the group. Twin Jumo 004 turbojets producing 980 pounds of thrust each, top speed 540 miles per hour, ceiling 3700 feet, 430mm cannon in the nose. On paper, it outclasses a P-51 in almost every category except range and turning radius. So why didn't they change the course of the air war? One of the officers asked. The engineer gestured to a partially disassembled engine. For one thing, reliability. These engines needed an overhaul every 10-25 hours. For another, production. They needed specialized metals they were short on. And Allied bombing disrupted the manufacturing chain. Bishop wandered away from the group, approaching a Me-262 that sat apart from the others. Its yellow number 4 designation was still visible on the fuselage, though it was battered and patched in several places. "That one has an interesting history," said a voice behind him. Bishop turned to see a German man in civilian clothes approaching. "I'm Dr. Weber, formerly with Messerschmitt. I'm assisting your technical teams." "What's special about this one?" Bishop asked. "It was damaged in combat, but managed to limp home. The pilot survived being shot down in another jet later. He claimed an American pilot allowed him to bail out instead of strafing him. Quite unusual in this war." Bishop studied the aircraft more closely. "I think this might have been the one I damaged. February 1945, escorting bombers to Augsburg." Weber's eyebrows rose. "Then you might have encountered Oberleutnant Dorfman. He spoke of an American who showed him mercy." "Is he available?" "I'd like to meet him," Bishop said, surprising himself with the request. "He survived the war, yes. He's being held at a POW camp not far from here. I could perhaps arrange a meeting if your superiors approve." 3 days later, Bishop found himself sitting across from Hans Dorfman in the officers' mess of the POW camp. The German looked thin but healthy, his wire-rimmed glasses giving him more the appearance of a university student than a fighter pilot. "So you are the Mustang pilot who could have killed me," Dorfman said after they were introduced. There was no bitterness in his tone, merely professional curiosity. Bishop nodded. "I've been examining your Me-262s. Remarkable machines." "Yes, they were." Dorfman smiled faintly. "We thought they would change everything. We were. Intoxicated by the technology, the speed, We believed one Me-262 could defeat 10 of your fighters, and technically you were probably right, Bishop acknowledged. If it had been a one-on-one contest, the 262 would win almost every time. But it was never one-on-one, was it? Dorfman said, his eyes distant with memory. It was 8 against 100, technology against production capacity, and in that contest, we never had a chance. They talked for over an hour, two former adversaries finding common ground in their shared experiences as pilots. As Bishop prepared to leave, Dorfman asked a final question. "Why didn't you shoot me when I was bailing out?" Many would have. Bishop considered the question carefully. "I don't know. In that moment, I didn't see a Nazi or even a German. I just saw another pilot, and I thought, that could be me tomorrow. This war has seen enough death." Dorfman nodded slowly. "A humanity that transcends the conflict. Perhaps that gives me hope for what comes after all this." In July 1947, Hans Dorfman, now released from POW status, stood on the tarmac of Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio. He had been hired, along with several other former Luftwaffe technical experts, to assist the Americans in developing their own jet aircraft program. Beside him stood Walter Bishop, now a civilian test pilot with the newly formed U.S. Air Force. They watched as a P-80 Shooting Star, America's first operational jet fighter, took off with a distinctive howl reminiscent of the Me-262. "It's strange," Dorfman said, as the jet climbed rapidly into the summer sky. 2 years ago, we were trying to kill each other. Now we work together to build the next generation of aircraft." "The world has changed," Bishop replied. "There's a new contest brewing, and it's not against Germany anymore." Dorfman nodded, understanding the reference to growing tensions with the Soviet Union. "The technology we created for war will now maintain the peace through strength. There's an irony there." "Your Me-262s were ahead of their time," Bishop acknowledged. "But they taught us all an important lesson." "Yes," Dorfman agreed, "that no technological advantage, however significant, can overcome an overwhelming industrial disadvantage. One genius invention cannot defeat 1,000 good ones." They fell silent as the P-80 completed its circuit and came in for a landing, its sleek form a descendant of the revolutionary German jet that had briefly terrorized the skies over Europe before being overwhelmed by the sheer numerical superiority of American air power. The Me-262 had represented the pinnacle of German engineering, a last, desperate attempt to regain control of the skies through technological superiority. But against the vast industrial might of the United States, even this wonder weapon had proven insufficient. The lesson was clear. In modern industrial warfare, quantity had a quality all its own, and that concludes our story. If you made it this far, please share your thoughts in the comments. What part of this historical account surprised you most? Don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories from World War II, and check out the video on screen for another incredible tale from history. Until next time.